You're the CEO of Liberty Sentinel Media. You've spoken at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. You've been interviewed by Glenn Beck. You're on a Fox documentary, a lot of things. Can you give us a little bit of background on what you do?
Well, thank you very much for having me. I guess primarily I consider myself a Christian journalist. Christian first. Journalist is just my day job, I guess, if you will, my mission while I'm here. And so I've always kind of been guided since I came to know the Lord by a verse that jumped out at me from Ephesians chapter 5. It's verse 11. Talks about having no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reproving them or exposing them, depending on the translation. And so I think that really should be the mission of all true journalists, is to expose.
Can you repeat that quote? That was so good.
Yeah, so it's Ephesians 5:11. It's have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them, or some translations use the word expose them. And, so much of journalism today has just become like public relations. But real journalism is taking hidden information that powerful or bad people don't want out there and putting it out there to the public so they can make better decisions. So I do that. I write books. I do a number of TV and radio programs that we produce through my company. Education is my passion. So I homeschool our 6 children alongside my wife. I serve as a senior fellow at Classical Conversations. Written 2 books on education, and I do believe it's one of the most important battles. So that's why I spend so much of my time on this particular issue.
Cool. What kind of successes have you experienced along the way?
Well, I guess it depends on how you define success. In terms of worldly success, I wouldn't say I've made, huge amounts of money, which is one thing that the world cares a lot about. But I would argue, and this maybe sounds cliche or cheesy, but I would argue that my greatest successes are my family, right? My children. They're growing up as the Bible teaches, in the fear, the discipline, the nurture, the admonition of the Lord, trying to do as Proverbs 22:6 says, teach them the way that they should go, so that when they're old, they will not depart from it. And so, I would argue that that's true success. We've got a little farm that's under construction right now. So as far as professional success, I've received a lot of accolades. I've gotten awards and, quite a few different awards. We've sold a lot of books, and we reach millions of people every year. But I think those things are all secondary to the more important things. And ultimately, and again, this might sound cliche or cheesy, but ultimately, I'm not all that interested in accolades or praises from the world or from humans, although, it's nice. But I'm much more interested in the primary audience, which is, of course, my Creator. And he has put me in my family, so I see that as my number one responsibility. But it's been a really incredible journey. I've been able to speak with a lot of people. I've met President Trump. I've met our governor multiple times. I get to interact with members of the cabinet and foreign leaders. I get to go to UN conferences and ask questions of presidents and potentates and prime ministers. So there certainly has been a lot of fun things along this incredible journey.
Well done. So you're running a lot of different hustles going on your site, Liberty Sentinel, which is there in your background. There's a number of different initiatives. Could you just walk us through how you built that up over time, what that journey looked like?
Sure, happy to do it. So it actually began in college. I was in journalism school, and I was connected with other young people. And our primary interest was actually liberty. I still would have described myself back then as kind of a libertarian. And so I connected naturally with people who kind of shared my views on the role of government, the role of the individual. And we had a good time. We set up Liberty Sentinel Media, originally as a nonprofit. And our idea was that the quality of journalism that existed both on campus and in the broader community was absolutely atrocious. And I knew that from experience. I had been writing for a number of different publications, including the main newspaper owned by the New York Times, including other local publications. And I got to see firsthand that something was really, really lacking in the journalism department. It's one thing to try to be fair and balanced and include all perspectives. It's another thing to try to exclude all perspectives that don't fit the narrative. And unfortunately, that's what I witnessed. So we decided that a new publication needed to exist, and we set about to do that. We called it the Liberty Sentinel of North Central Florida. And it was a ton of fun. We started off just a group of, I think we were like 6 or 7 guys. And then from there, we grew. We got more volunteers. We started off, I think our first print run, I think we might have done 4,000 copies, and we realized, wow, those went really, really quickly. We were distributing them through local businesses, through newspaper boxes that we had acquired. We were handing them out on campus. and we ran out very, very quickly. So by the time we were done, we did that for about a year. By the time we were done, we were printing 15,000 copies of every edition. We were getting hundreds of thousands of views on our website. All of the local political leaders were banging down our door to have interviews and get in our paper. And so it taught me that the public is really hungry for truth. Eventually, we had irreconcilable differences, me and the other folks running the newspaper. I became a Christian and moved in, I would say, a more conservative leaning direction. Yeah, I'm still all about individual liberty, but just, tempered with morality and recognizing that God's moral truths are superior to our perspectives. So we kind of went our different ways. I kept the company. I spent many years then writing for the New American Magazine, which I started writing for when I was in college. It was the first national publication I became aware of where the truth could be published. And so started doing that as a freelancer, moved over to Europe, overseas, to be with my girlfriend, who very shortly thereafter became my wife, and started writing for diverse publications. And kind of Liberty Sentinel Media just kind of stayed in the background. I kept the company up. I kept filing the mandatory reports for the government and did a little bit of contracting work and consulting work through there. But as time went on, I realized that there really was a value to having my own operation rather than just contributing to other publications. And I still contribute to a lot of other publications. I write for the Epic Times. I write for a lot of different publications out there. But I realized there was a value in having my own thing that I could control, that I could do what I wanted with. And so when we came back to the United States, started getting more and more requests for, could you do a radio show? Could you do a TV show? Would you be willing to host a podcast? Things like that. So we have gradually expanded, and it's really grown very rapidly over the last few years. We've built up a very significant newsletter now. And so just grateful for the opportunity to do all that in addition to the other things that I love. And, it's, of course, a lot of hard work. Nobody ever said that owning a business or running an operation was going to be easy, but it's very rewarding, and it's incredible to just have the freedom and to be able to reach millions of people every year with what I consider to be important information.
One of the purposes of this podcast is to inspire the next generation of virtuous leaders. What advice would you give to a young person who's truth seeker, wants to have a bigger impact? Do you have a kind of like a blueprint or just general advice you could lay out for them?
Well, the world will try to convince you that if you don't do what they tell you to do, you're going to be a failure. And I lived that in college. You have to go get a big corporate job. You have to sit in a cubicle. You have to do things the way they've always been done. You have to compromise your principles if you want to work in this industry. Frankly, I refuse to accept that. Now, I had some obvious, very significant advantages. I had parents who were willing to help me and stand by me. I had a girlfriend, became wife, who had a very good career. So I could afford to take a big risk and say, well, I'm not going to serve the man, and I'm going to go out and do my own thing. And thankfully it worked out. Whether I would have been able to do that if I had not had that kind of backup plan there, if you will, I don't know. But what I would say to people is, if the Lord doesn't build the house, they who labor in vain. And so follow God, trust God. He won't lead you astray. The best way to discern his will is actually to read his word. So just open up your Bible and be in prayer. And don't listen to the voices that tell you have to go against what you know to be right. And the reality is that if you follow what you should be doing, God will reward that. And that doesn't necessarily mean monetary rewards. That doesn't necessarily mean praise from men, but it means doing the right thing will be rewarded in a very real and a very tangible way. Not just being able to sleep good at night, but as the Bible itself says, how much more important are you than birds, right? If God feeds the birds, he's going to take care of you. So don't worry about it. So I would say, don't be afraid to take risks. Always try to keep the main thing, right? If you're working to serve men, you're going to fall short. Men will always, we live in a fallen world, right? Men will always have other ideas. Men will always try to lead you astray. And there are, of course, good people, as the Bible says, in many counselors there is wisdom. So always good to listen to other people's ideas, listen to other people's opinions. But I would say just stand firm on the truth, and God will absolutely reward that. And what happens is people get inspired by that, because like, wow, here's a guy who isn't willing to compromise his principles to get ahead or to get a good job or to make a lot of money. And that inspires other people to do the same. And I promise you, the harvest is plentiful and the workers are few. So there's a lot of space on the field to be doing important things.
People do get inspired, and that's exactly why you're on this show right now. From the entrepreneurial side of things, any advice?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said there. I would say relationships are critical, right? You want to form and nurture relationships, not in a kind of a self-seeking way, but in a give and take way. People can see that when you and I see this when people just want something from you, it's very obvious, and that's not going to be a relationship that's going to grow. But when you can help and receive help, those are the kind of relationships that end up being really, really fruitful down the line. So I would encourage people to really focus on relationships. Again, always do the right thing. There's going to be times where it's tempting to do the wrong thing, where you might be able to get ahead or step on top of somebody or enrich yourself at somebody else's expense, maybe even dishonesty or sin. Shun away from that. And I would say too, and I realize this probably sounds super cliche, but truth is unbelievably powerful. And that's not a figure of speech. When you stand on the truth, you become immovable. You become powerful in a very real, and not in a worldly sense, but in the sense of, God is with you when you're standing on the truth. So always stand on the truth. Always stand on what's right, and that may mean short-term consequences. It may mean short-term losses, but over the long term, it will be a huge benefit. Obviously, some of the obvious things, you want to serve your customers. You want to be a servant leader. You don't want to treat your employees like garbage. You want to treat them like your family. You want to make sure that you're treating people with kindness and respect. The golden rule, even for non-Christians, is a very, very, very important thing. Treat other people the way that you want to be treated. Love other people, be kind to other people, and try to serve other people. Jesus had some really important advice that those among you who want to be great, you need to be a servant, right? We're not like the pagans. We're not like the Gentiles. We're not going to lord it over each other like some kind of dictator, but rather whoever wants to be greatest, you be the servant of everybody else. And that, I think, is very, very valuable advice. It sounds cliche, and you hear it and you're like, oh, that's cute, but it really is true in almost a supernatural way. So I would encourage people to keep all those things in mind.
Part of the hero's journey is crossing the threshold. If you look at Lord of the Rings, when the hobbits left the Shire, or in the movie Ad Astra, there's multiple thresholds to cross. So in your journey, what were some of those thresholds to cross where you felt like you were making a risk, you were taking a leap, you're taking a jump? Do I really speak out against this organization? Do I really say this? This could get me canceled. This could get me criticized. Be curious to know what that was like for you, that maybe the hesitancy, reluctance, fear you experienced, and then what happened afterwards once you took that leap.
Yeah, there are so many examples that I can think of on that front, both in terms of things to speak out about and in terms of risks to take. Once we started having children, the decision had to be made. Does my wife go back to work, or does she stay home with the children? If she stays home with the children, that means we're going to lose our stable income. It means we're going to lose, the whole financial stability that we've been used to, and then it's all on me. That is a big and very, very scary responsibility. That you're not just looking after yourself anymore. Now you've got wife, you've got kids who are depending on you, and so that was a maybe frightening is not the right word, but intimidating choice to make. And I look back on it now, and I am so grateful that we decided to do that. And so is my wife, and so are my children. It has been one of the greatest blessings to be able to have her at home as a full-time homemaker, as a full-time teacher of our children. And yes, there's a big sacrifice involved. Nobody's going to deny that losing a very sizable source of income is a difficult sacrifice to make, but the rewards are so much greater. And so on that front, I would encourage you, if you feel led by truth, by what the scriptures say, to take a particular risk, do it. Okay, not foolish risks, but intelligent risks that are ultimately for the greater good. In terms of having the courage to speak out, I'm actually in the midst of something to do with that right now. It's a very uncomfortable position to be in. So almost the entire conservative movement and many churches and a growing segment of even the homeschool movement have jumped on this bandwagon of the government ought to be funding our homeschools. The government ought to be funding our private schools. And people get really emotional about that. And so me saying, no, guys, I actually think that we're better off not linking up with the government, not taking the government's money, partly for moral reasons, right? I don't have the right to have the government take money from my neighbor and give it to me. Partly for practical reasons. As soon as the government funds something, the government wants to control that thing. And this has always been true throughout human history. You can see it right now. How did the government take control of all our hospitals? With federal funding. How did the government take control of our state governments? With federal funding. My dad used to say that to me as a kid growing up. With federal aid comes federal control. And he meant, I'm paying your bills, and so you obey me. But that was the terminology he used. With federal aid comes federal control. And so that has been very tough. I've been attacked relentlessly. I've been accused of being a stooge of the public school unions, which, of course, nothing could be further from the truth. Those who know me know that one of my biggest missions in life is to try to get children out of the public school system. But I think there's a right way to do it and a wrong way. And, unfortunately, I've had to go up against a lot of friends who I love dearly, people who I know are well-intentioned, people who I know want ultimately the same thing as me. They want kids to get a God-fearing, decent education. So that's been tough. But, of course, you see the rewards. And we see now the things that I warned about, and the things that there are others who've also been sounding the alarm about this. The very things that we warned about are now coming to pass. And so it's not an issue of, I told you so, but it's an issue of, I can sleep at night. I know I did the right thing. I had an opinion about this that I felt was guided by transcendent truth, and I was willing to share it. And yes, it caused people to get mad at me, and it caused people to say bad things about me, but that's okay. And there was a similar, a few years ago, where the Convention of States movement was a very big deal, and the whole conservative side of the American political spectrum started jumping on this bandwagon. And having looked at the different arguments, having examined what was going on here, I concluded that this was a risk that I didn't think we ought to take as a country. And that brought me into direct conflict with very powerful people in the conservative movement who didn't like what I had to say. And so it cost me speaking engagements, and it cost me financially. It cost me some relationships. People said, well, if you won't get on board with this, then we don't want to be associated with it. Okay. It is what it is. But for me, it felt like the right thing to do. And now in retrospect, I'm very glad that I did it. And if we are to lose our Constitution as a result of a constitutional convention, at least I'll be able to say, hey, I spoke out when it was hard to do it. I warned about this. And so at least it's not on my shoulders that this happened. There have been many other things too. Going back to the very beginning, when we were talking about the student newspaper we had, we became aware of a story that was absolutely horrendous, involving terrible things being perpetrated against children. And the more we dug into it, the more opposition we got, the more pressure we got. But we decided to continue pursuing this. And, yes, there were moments of fear, and yes, there were moments of intimidation, but ultimately it was the right thing to do. It needed to be done. And so I would just encourage people, when you feel pressure, be encouraged by that. When you feel fear, you should only fear the Lord. In fact, hundreds of times in the scripture, God tells you not to fear. If you want to know how much God frowns upon that, go to Numbers 13 and 14. He almost destroyed his own people for expressing fear after he told them to march into the land that he had given them. So
that's really ironic.
Yeah. So we do need to be very firm that, we cannot fall into fear of men. Only fear of the Lord is appropriate. So those are a few examples, and there are countless more.
Were there any examples where you were concerned that your physical safety might be threatened?
Oh, absolutely. That has happened many, many times. And the example I gave in college was just one such example. In fact, I got phone calls threatening my life. I got phone calls threatening me with arrest. And that's scary, especially when you're, a punk kid and you don't really know how the world works, and you're finally leaving the nest. You don't have your mom and dad to help you anymore, and what do I do in this situation? And so the first thing I did was call my dad, of course, and he's no longer with us, but we have had threats on our lives many times. And it's become almost a regular thing, right? Sometimes I go for speaking events, and Antifa puts out things on Twitter and says, Alex Newman is showing up and we need to go protest. And I guess that's supposed to be intimidating. But for me, it's just an opportunity to reach new people. I'll go out and talk to protesters. Hey, what is it exactly? We had I spoke at an event here in North Florida last year, and we had a big group of Democrat protesters They claimed that I was anti-education. And so I went out and started talking to them. Hey, guys, what is it that I said that you find so objectionable? And they didn't really know. They had just been told by their party leader. So even though that can be scary and intimidating, there's a real value to that. And of course, struggles and overcoming fear really is one of the tools that God uses to make you stronger, to give you character. And so I think we need to take it all with joy.
Well, if you're taking flack, you're over the target. I think it's a sign of success.
Absolutely. And if nobody was saying anything bad about you, if nobody was complaining, then you're probably not being very impactful. Jesus himself said, all those who shall live righteously in Christ Jesus shall be persecuted. So if nobody was saying mean things about you, if nobody was lying about you, if nobody was threatening you, you'd have to wonder, am I really being effective in this mission that I'm supposed to be on?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm convinced that if we're not persecuted, then we're just not living Christianity.
Absolutely.
Do you do anything, take any prudential measures to protect your safety?
I won't go through all of them because I know this is going to be in a public forum, but I am licensed and regularly carry. Obviously I take precautions for my family. The Bible says whoever doesn't protect and take care of and support his own family is worse than an infidel. And so, I see one of my primary missions in life is to protect my family. And so, our home has, we have measures in place to make sure that everything's that we have had crazy people show up at our door before. And so we take measures to try to make it more difficult to know where we're at. This whole swatting craze that's been going on lately is certainly concerning. So I always say to people who are in the spotlight, it's always good to have a relationship with your local officials, with your mayor, with your county commissioners, with your sheriff, if you can, with your police chief, because when they know you, there's less likely to be misunderstandings. If somebody calls and says something crazy, they'll know that it's probably not true. So yeah, there's a lot of that, but we also, I encourage people to be prudent, not fearful, but to be prudent, because the reality is there are wicked people out there. There are the powers and principalities that the Apostle Paul talks about in Ephesians 6. So we need spiritual protection. We need to cover our family in prayer, and we need to trust that the Lord will do his part on that. And there are also physical dangers and threats. And so I think we need to be not fearful, but prudent in protecting ourselves from all those. And of course, I try my best to follow that.
God bless you, man. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
So how can people follow you, Alex?
There's several ways. Our easiest place is just the website, libertysentinel.org. You can subscribe to our free newsletter there. We send it out twice a week. I'm on X at AlexNewman_JOU. People can read a lot of my journalistic work at thenewamerican.com. I serve as senior editor for the New American magazine. I encourage people to get a subscription to the magazine. It's a great publication. Classical Conversations is the homeschool community that my family and I have enrolled in. I also work closely with Freedom Project Academy. And Public School Exit, if you need information on how to get your kids out of public school, I serve as the executive director there as a volunteer. So a lot of different ways, but simplest place to start at least is libertysentinel.org. And I really appreciate you having me on the program. It's been a great pleasure.
This was fun. Thank you, Alex Newman.
Absolutely. Thank you.